So welcome to the perennial crop production session of the Indiana Small Farms Conference for 2022. We thank you for joining us this afternoon and hope you'll enjoy hearing from several different speakers that we have to offer here. Real quick, before we get started, we do want to recognize and thank the sponsors of the Indiana Small Farms Conference. We've had a good track record, and in large part to folks being willing to support the conference and recognizing the value of small farms and the importance of small farmers within Indiana. So we thank everyone for their sponsorship. We also would like to request that you as participants do a really quick survey for us on giving us a little background on who you are. I have posted, as you can see, the QR code there, which you can aim your camera at on your smartphone and take the demographic survey that way. And I have also just posted that in the chat. So if you would not mind doing that, we would appreciate it. As the slide indicates, we are required to report this information to the USDA. So your voluntary participation is greatly appreciated. And I'll just leave that up there for one more second or two so folks can get that done for us. And while I'm leaving it there, I should go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Amy Thompson. I am Agriculture and Natural Resources Extension Educator in Monroe County. And I've been part of the Indiana Small Farms Conference since its inception, part of the program planning committee. And I also want to identify my co-moderator, Tamara Benjamin. She is the director of the Diversified Farming and Food Systems and the chair of our Small Farms Conference. And we're thankful for her leadership getting us to where we are. Specifically for this session, we want to give a shout out to High Mowing Organic Seeds. They are the sponsor for this perennial crop session, and really appreciate their willingness to support Indiana small farmers. And then, with that, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we'll get on to the speakers. Our first speaker who will be speaking on persimmons and pawpaws is Chris Heater. Chris is a biologist at Indiana University, where she oversees the management of the International Repository for Biological Samples. She is a board member for the Indiana Nut and Fruit Growers Association and the Northern Nut Growers Association, and it is current president of the North American Fruit Explorers Group. Chris and her husband, Brian, own a small 100-acre orchard and classified forest in Salisbury, Indiana. And you can see Chris's title slide there. And Chris, I'm just going to let you take it away from here. And thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Amy. It's good to be here with all of you guys. Sadly, we can't be in person. Usually I'm a very much a show and tell type of person. I like to bring things and use all of our senses to feel, touch, and see stuff that's going on. So we can't do that, but I'm going to try my best to do some descriptive things for you. This talk that I'm doing today was originally a talk that was designed by Jerry Lehman, and it was about increasing small farm profits with persimmon and pawpaw. And my understanding is he did this many years ago for the Small Farm Conference. And I have kind of revamped the talk a little bit. It's a little shorter than what he had given, but I'll give you kind of a taste of what's out there with persimmon and pawpaw, which are two native fruits here in Indiana and in the Midwest. And so again, this is Jerry Lehman's talk for the most part. Jerry passed away. I only got to know him for about 1.5 years. And he was just a phenomenal guy, was breeding persimmon and pawpaw and was kind of the go-to guy here in Indiana and the Midwest for much of this. So this is a huge tribute to him, and I probably will not do the talk justice, but I'll do my best. So we're going to start with persimmon. Hopefully many of you have seen persimmon, but if not, this is what it looks like. And it's really quite prevalent down here in the southern half of the state, but we do have growers growing it in the northern part as well. It grows for me like a weed on my property. It was funny when I first bought our property, we were hoping and praying for just one persimmon tree on our 100 acres. And it turns out we had like, thousands. So I feel quite fortunate to have that. The native persimmon for North America looks like this. It has seeds in it. It grows on a deciduous tree that can get, pretty tall depending on where it's planted in the fields. It gets pretty tall if separated far enough from other trees. In an old growth forest, I have trees that are well over 100 feet that are still producing trees. The size of the fruit can vary. The ones here on the left are typical for most trees, but there are some trees that will push to this larger side. And then Jerry Lehman and several others in the recent decade have tried to cross hybridize the American persimmon with the Asian persimmon to get fewer seeds and to get bigger fruit. And so those would get to be a little bit bigger than this. And the idea was to get more pulp, more value, more buck for your size of fruit. These trees are dioecious, which means there's male and female. So this is a female flower. And then these are the male. These are really tiny. They're hard to see. So you really have to kind of know what you're looking for when you're looking at persimmon trees to know whether you have a male or female. There's a lot of funky genetics that I'm not going to get into, but there is some speculation that there's a little bit of, there could be some hermaphrodites out there. There could be some self-pollination, but for the most part, it's rare that you can have male and female on the same tree. So cultivation-wise, again, male and female trees, the typical sort of production spacing would be 30 feet to 20 feet. I've seen that pushed to 20 by 20. However, these trees will grow within a foot of each other and still produce massive amounts of fruit. And that's kind of what happens on my property. I don't cultivate, I don't put any input into it. They just pop up and they grow. And so I have got little stands that, the trees are 1 to 2 feet apart and are producing prolifically. They prefer well-drained soil, but again, for me, it grows like a weed. So, I find it just about everywhere, where well-drained or not. In fact, I've actually my husband mistakenly burned half a tree down, not knowing it was a persimmon, and it just came right back with the next year without any problems. It blooms after the late spring frost. So that's one of the nice things, those of us that are growing apples and pears and other fruits, we're getting, bombarded with these late frosts that are kind of killing our fruit. But persimmon, no problem with that. I've yet to have a year where my persimmon's been affected by anything in the spring. They require no spraying. They will look a little sickly in the fall right before they start to drop, or even in the summer, they'll get some spots on it, but that has no effect whatsoever on productivity. They just look kind of sad, but they're fine. The fruit is astringent when it's on the trees. So this is a fruit that you don't want to pick and eat. I will not even challenge you to try that. I've done it and it's not fun. So you have to wait till it drops to pick it up. So that's a plus and a minus. That means you don't have to climb up on a ladder to pick it, but then you do have to fight whatever is on the ground, like, deer, scat, and things like that. So there are ways around that, which we'll talk about briefly, but that can be an advantage or disadvantage depending on how you look at it. Here's an example of a tree out in a more open space, just to give you an example of how big it gets and how wide it can get. Again, that will vary depending on the surroundings, how many trees you have close to each other. And here's an example that Jerry had on how he initially was collecting fruit. So he would actually put tarps or screens underneath the trees right before drop in the fall, allow them to drop so that they weren't getting dropped into deer scat or raccoon scat or things like that. He modified that in later years in his orchard and was putting down straw around the trees so that you could get a really clean sense of where the fruit was and to make sure that there wasn't anything around it. So there's multiple ways of doing this. I won't spend a lot of time, but feel free to reach out if you want to talk about that a little bit more. This does play into what you can do with the fruit in terms of Indiana law and FSMA in terms of fruit. So technically, you can't pick it off the ground and go sell it. And Amy and everyone at Purdue will be much better sources to talk about that. But this is something that does need to be considered when you want to think about the end product of your fruit. In terms of processing, there are seeds, so you do need to get the seeds out. Back in the day, and this is how I still do it, I just use a colander. You throw the fruit in, you stir it around, pulp squeezes out, you collect the pulp, and then you leave the seeds and skin behind. There are now more modern little food mills that you can use. This is another example of a way to process small batches. And then there are people who've been looking into the larger scale applications for processing persimmon. And this is just an example that Jerry had. I quite honestly don't know where this is located, but I do know that this is a big topic within the Indiana fruit and nut growers. So this is something we're going to be talking about a lot more, finding ways to large scale produce pulp in a commercial type setting. And then here's what it looks like in the end. So on the left, you got 5 buckets of pulp. On the right, you got the 2 5-gallon buckets of seeds and skin that's left over. So that's what it looks like if you're doing a much larger scale. What are the market options for this? So there are, you can think about this in terms of farmers market. And when I say whole fruit, that's something that, again, needs to be carefully considered in terms of Indiana law. And I won't go into that in any detail, but I know that this was one of the things that many of the growers back in the last 5 to 10 years have been considering when they start to do hybrids, because they're looking for fruit that's going to hang a little bit better. Maybe eventually, if it's a hybrid between an Asian and a native, that it could eventually be picked off the tree and that we don't have to go through the process of cleaning up what's been dropped. Pulping, there's a huge demand usually in the fall down here for pulp. That requires a commercial kitchen if you're going to sell it. You can make value-added products, pudding, cookies, breads, and again, just that disclaimer, you need to talk to your local extension office to find out what you legally can and cannot do and what requires a commercial kitchen or not. And then how to market. Down here, persimmons are big and people want persimmons, so it doesn't take much to market. But if someone has never had persimmon before, offering recipes and cookbooks with purchase is one way to market. Advertising in local papers, and this is Jerry's slide. So he was an old school guy. He loved to do it the old school way, and so advertising in the paper was one of his ways. But social media now, there's lots of ways to get the word out that you've got persimmons. And so the question is there a bigger market? And Jerry's take on this a few years ago, and I would agree this is still the case. Yes, there is a bigger market, but we need to find a way to commercially pulp it and get it to these bigger markets. I think once we get over that hurdle, I think there's a lot of room to grow here. And I'm not going to go through this in detail. You'll be able to access this presentation and see some of these examples. But the take on this is, start planting trees now and growing if you're interested in this, because we foresee a bigger market in the years to come. Here's Jerry again, around in this area in the fall. Just about any local ice cream shop you can go to and you will find persimmon pudding, because that's just a thing down here. There is a little bit of information here on the income potential. I'm not going to go through that in any detail. You'll be able to access this. This is a little dated. It's from about a decade ago. James Claypool was Jerry's mentor. And he was very much into making persimmon a household name in terms of fruit. And so he was doing a lot of analysis on production costs and what the grower would get back. And this again will vary year to year based on what you're getting per pound. People here in the grocery stores are paying about $7 a pound for persimmon pulp. So this $3 a pound is really low right now. And again, depends on the scale that you're selling it at. If you're selling it wholesale, then of course the price per pound is going to be a little bit lower. But if you're doing smaller batches, you could potentially get a higher value. So the question is, are there varieties that are suitable for commercial growers? And the answer is yes. And I won't go into those varieties, but if you want that information, feel free to reach out to me and I will get you to the people who are most familiar with all the varieties and the best ones probably for commercial growing. When I say commercial growing, I'm talking large scale. You can do this definitely on a small scale with a lot of the varieties that are out there. Is there a market for the pulp? Yes. And can it be grown and marketed profitably? Definitely yes. And so Jerry's take is just grow, start growing, grow, grow, grow. So let's switch now to pawpaw. That was kind of a whirlwind trip through persimmon, but pawpaw, again, here's Jerry, and this is what a pawpaw on a tree looks like. It looks very tropical. And these trees are much smaller than a persimmon or other big deciduous trees. So they only grow about 15 to 20 feet in height, and you can plant them way more densely, and you actually need to plant them more densely. They have beautiful foliage in the fall. The pawpaw has been nicknamed over the years the Indiana banana. Again, very tropical. Its flesh is a custard feel and taste to it. Flavors can range depending on the variety, from a banana, like a cross between a banana and a mango. Some have a caramel taste to them, hints of caramel. Again, lots of varieties out there. So depending on the variety that you have might depend on the flavor that you're getting and how ripe or not ripe it is. You can eat it fresh. There are specialty desserts you can make from it. I will give you sort of the caveat on the fresh eating. Some people do have a little bit of a reaction to eating it fresh, especially the more they eat. There is some people call it a neurotoxin. Some people are affected by it, some are not. Over time, it will make some people feel nauseated when they eat too much of it. Other people have no problem at all. So I think it's a genetic predisposition to whether or not you're affected by eating it fresh. It is in the custard apple family. So again, custard apple family is mostly tropical, but these are just some examples of what it's related to. Cultivation, a little tricky to begin with, but once you get it going, it can produce really well for you. So the thing to keep in mind is that with pawpaws, ultraviolet light kills the first year young seedlings. So you have to shade them. And this is one of the reasons why pawpaws grow prolifically in forests. So in my forest, I have pawpaw patches. I can find them in so many places in my forest, but they don't produce fruit. And the thing is, in the forest, they grow really well in shade, and they're also clonal. So they'll send out suckers and grow basically clonal trees of itself. So you'll find pawpaw patches in the forest, but oftentimes they won't be producing fruit. They are incredibly difficult to dig up and transplant. So for example, I could not dig mine up out of the forest and move it to a sunny spot. It just won't make it. So the best way is to buy potted plants or start plants from seed in pots, if that's the way you want to go. And you'll need to keep them shaded. There's ways of doing that with tree tube shades and various ways. I'm happy to talk to people about that. I've seen all different sort of setups for that. And then after the first couple of years, give them sun, and they'll start producing once you've got some sun and some different varieties. So pollination can be difficult. So the one thing you want to avoid is having all one variety. So multiple varieties is good. Planting them within 5 to 10 feet of each other is really important, unless you want to get out there and hand pollinate, which Jerry loved to do. So that was something he would do. The trees themselves and the flowers smell nasty. I've heard people describe the flowers as smelling like dead, rotted flesh. So if you have an agritouristy business, maybe this is not something for you in the spring. But there are certain pollinators that are attracted to that stinky, pungent smell that will pollinate. But it's only a select number of pollinators. So don't expect honeybees to be out there pollinating your pawpaws, because they will avoid it like the plague. And again, you need multiple varieties, because even though the male and female parts are all in the same tree, there's a difference on when they open up. So the pistil is more receptive, the female part is more receptive. And so you need multiple varieties to help cross-pollinate with that. The advantages to growing pawpaws on your small farm, there's a big demand for them right now. People want new and unusual produce, and pawpaws fits that bill. They're looking for something that tastes unique and different. They're also looking to add some unique flavors, especially restaurants, to their meals. And with the big grow local thing that's going on around the country, people want local food. So there is this demand. There's definitely demand here in Indiana. There's been what many of us call a pawpaw renaissance that's really in the last 10 years caused pawpaws to explode in demand. Another advantage is the fruit does bear within as early as the first 5 years and can bear quite a bit. There's very few insects that prey on pawpaw, which is also the same for persimmon. So you don't really have to worry about upkeep and management of the trees once they get going. They have a long harvest, and if, again, you've got different varieties that have different ripening periods or different pollination, slightly offset in pollination, you can get up to 2 months of harvest in the fall with pawpaws. There's big festivals now. Ohio has a huge pawpaw festival, and people have really flocked to that conference in past years. So again, these are the kinds of things that are really promoting and pushing these local foods and kind of getting it out there and getting people interested. Again, farmers market's an option. Oriana here, she's not here in Indiana, but she's in Chicago, and she's a big pawpaw grower. She sells at farmers markets up there. This is a fruit that doesn't have a long shelf life. So that's one thing to keep in mind. You got to pick and take it to market. You don't want to have it, you can't leave it sitting in a fridge or a cooler for any length of time. It's a very much a fresh fruit. So that's one thing to take into consideration. It's not going to keep for a long period of time like an apple or a pear. Huge interest these days in brewing and fermenting pawpaw, and I suspect this might happen with persimmon as well in upcoming years. Down here, Upland Brewery is one of the big breweries that does this in our area, but there's a huge market and a huge desire for pawpaw in the brewing industry. Potential includes jams, jellies, sauces. Again, talk to your local extension agency to find out what you can and cannot do and what requires a commercial kitchen for that. Then the level of ripening might dictate how you want to use it. So really new, freshly ripened fruits is good in more things like ice cream and cheesecakes and things like that. And in the beer and the ales, the darker, older fruit that's ripened even more, those are better in the baked desserts. This covers operating costs. Again, this is a couple years old. This was Jerry's slide. And it all, again, depends on how much you're going to get, what the going market for any given year is, price per pound. $5 per pound is, I think, a little old and outdated now. I know people are getting $8 to $10 a pound, depending on the situation. And again, depending on how much you're selling. So if you're selling at a wholesale market, you're going to get a lower price per pound just because of volume. But if you're doing it at a farmer's market, you're probably going to be able to get away with a higher price per pound. And then again, as Amy said, I'm involved heavily in the fruit and nut growing world. And this just happened in the last 5 years for me. I'm kind of late to the game, but the Indiana Nut and Fruit Growers Organization has been around for over 50 years. Some amazing people in this group who've been growing fruits, especially persimmon and pawpaw, for the last however many years, and they are incredibly knowledgeable. So if you have an interest in this, for $10 a year, this is one of the best organizations you can get in and start talking to these guys, and they are generous. If you're serious about growing, they will be more than happy to take you to their farms and show you what they're doing and give you tips. We meet 4 times a year. We just had a meeting yesterday. So, and then the North American Fruit Explorers, again, lots of people in here very knowledgeable. We just did a persimmon and pawpaw talk as part of our conference last November, and that was recorded. It included some younger guys who have learned from Jerry Lehman and guys like Cliff England and Don Compton, older guys who are not going to be with us forever. So these younger guys have taken up the helm and are starting to really dive into the breeding and preserving some of our varieties. So this is another group I highly recommend. And then I'm going to leave you with this comment. Darren is one of the owners of Brambleberry Farm down in Paoli. Some of you may know him. This just posted on one of the Facebook pages a couple days ago, and I really like it. He says he feels like we're on the very teetering edge of a persimmon renaissance that will blow away the current pawpaw renaissance completely out of the water. So if this is something you're thinking about, definitely get involved with our local growers who are doing this, because I think there's going to be a lot of great things happening in this area. So again, this is how to reach me, either at the university, or gosh, I even put my wrong email address up there. So kklug@indiana.edu or chrisheater@yahoo. It should have been yahoo.com. So that's how to reach me if you have questions. And again, I'm on the board of all these organizations. So if you reach out to me, I can get you to the right people in the right organization. So.
Thank you, Chris. We do have about 5 minutes for questions. We're going to try and stay on track with the schedule, so we won't start our next talk until 12:30. So if people have questions, I think we're a small enough group that folks could unmute and ask them directly, or if you want to type them in the chat, we can facilitate the question asking. Might be best actually if people raise their hands if they do have questions. There was a question or a comment that someone had success picking the fruit early and letting it ripen over a couple days, and the astringency dissipated evidently.
Yeah. That will completely depend on the variety. So that was one of the things that Jerry, I think, was aiming for, and many of the breeders are now currently trying to do. And I have a wide variety of genetics on my property, and there's some that I can pick and do that same thing, but there's a lot of them that, man, no way. And there's some of them that even they hang on after the last frost and they still have some astringency. So it completely depends on the genetics. So, but there are definitely people who are working to kind of find those genetics that will allow you to do that.
And I would disagree with you. I think everybody needs to try a green persimmon in their lifetime.
Yeah.
But we did have another question. Someone's looking for suggestions to start persimmons from seed.
So that's a really good question. So I think this is something to keep in mind for both persimmon and pawpaw. So there are people who can provide seed. I can provide seed. You know, you can come pick all the persimmons you want off my property and collect the seed, but they do need to be cold stratified. And so they need to be cleaned well and then put in like sand or peat moss or something and kept in a fridge or kept cold over the winter months, and then bring them out, and then, you know, a certain percentage will germinate. I can tell you, this is kind of an embarrassing story, but I did actually do a small test where I took seed out of the fruit, and then I also collected seed from scat, and the seed from scat grew much better after cold stratified. So there is something about going through the digestive process. I won't go into the chemical process, but it's basically a little bit of that acidity that goes through the digestive tract of an animal that probably helps the germination process. But there are people out there who I'm sure have played around with that a little bit more than I have. But yes, you definitely need, if you want to grow from seed, you gotta do the stratification. And you can get, for anyone who's interested, the DNR, usually at Bologna, you can buy bundles of persimmon if you get your order in early. So that's one way of getting seedlings, and then you would graft a desired variety onto those seedlings or varieties.
Great. We have a bit of a discussion going on in the chat. Someone asked, do brewers have different standards of fruit processing than farmers markets? And somebody mentioned that they want it aseptic so that they don't get unknown yeasts thrown into the mix. I don't know if you have any other comments to add to that, Chris.
Yeah, I suspect that is the case, because unless it's a very different type of brewer, they want to be able to reproduce. So all of these fruits, and this is something I personally like to do on my own, is I like to take a fruit and not wash it and ferment it, and you get some really wonderful flavors coming out. But brewers don't want to do that. They want reproducibility. So to my knowledge, anyone who's growing persimmon or pawpaws are doing that that really low percentage bleach wash, and then taking it taking it to the brewers that way. There was a guy down here who was actually working on behalf of the growers and collecting all the pawpaws, and then would take it to the brewers. So there was somebody down here who was helping facilitate that. But yeah, usually you've got to go through the washing process for that.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
Yep.
We
Can I
are
ask something real quick?
we are actually at 12:30, so we're going to go ahead and transition. If you want to type in the chat, Chris will be on and can respond in the chat if you wouldn't mind. With that, we'll introduce our next speaker, which is Chris Heater will be available in the chat to answer your question. Chris Sullivan will be our next speaker. And Chris is an advocate, speaker, educator, and consultant in local and regenerative food production and marketing. He has taught gardeners, homesteaders, and small farm producers on various topics, including nutrient-dense food production, building healthy soils, soil biology, and other topics related to organic and regenerative agriculture. He is the Indiana liaison for the Midwest Elderberry Cooperative and is currently in the process of helping to develop the commercial production and marketing of North American elderberry and elderberry value-added products in Indiana. So Chris, thank you for being here, and I will let you take it away.
You have my screen? Can you see it?
Yep, you look good.
All right. I'm not sure. This is not my usual setup, so as long as you can see everything, that's great.
Yep, you might scoot just a little closer to the microphone if possible.
Is that better?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
Great, great. Yeah, if you can see it, all right. I'm going to have to look at it over here on another screen. Something got kind of goofed up when I shared my screen here. So anyways, what I'm going to do is going to give you a big picture idea. I wish I, could see like a show of hands, that kind of thing, of anybody who's already tried elderberry or has looked into this at all. That would be helpful for me. But this is going to be pretty general, and I'm kind of gearing it toward people who aren't real familiar with what's going on as far as the commercial production of North American elderberry. And I'm going to talk about something here in a little bit that has to do with the market in terms of where this this particular plant, this species in the cultivars that we're using here in North America for production, and how that's different from a lot of the other products that we're seeing that are out there. Not that much different, but a little bit. But I'll get into that. So, anyways, but there is a big commercial potential for this. So one thing, first of all, let's go back a little bit. About 20 years ago, there was no commercial production. People were making value-added products and cottage industry type products and stuff, home remedies, whatever, usually either from berries that they bought that were imported into the country from Europe. That would be the North American elderberry, which is Sambucus nigra, very popular, very familiar, very good plant. But really no production of North American elderberry. And people, of course, were wild harvesting it and have been wild harvesting it in this country for centuries. But about 5 years ago, we were up to about 1,000 acres. I'd say by 2022, we're at about 2,000, close to 2,000 acres of commercial production of a plant that is called Sambucus nigra canadensis. In other words, North American elderberry. So it's very similar. A lot of people think it does taste better. Now keep in mind, you don't make a juice out of this that you drink. You make medicinals out of this. You make tinctures. There's a number of other things that you can do with it. People, of course, make jams and jellies, and I'll show you some value-added stuff here in a little bit. But it does have a couple different antioxidants in it. There's about 5 different antioxidants molecules that are actually in the European variety. This one has about 7. So there is a little bit of advantage there. but yeah, it's, things are starting to happen. I'm going to introduce you here to a couple people that have been really instrumental in making a lot of things happen. And these by no means are the only people around. I'm going to try to mention a few others that I don't have slides for, but if you're all thinking about this, I want you to think about the potential, because right now, most everything, as I said, for medicinal products that are made in the US, the dried berries that you see in the stores, usually that's almost always imported. So, you'd have like a couple 100,000 pounds of dried elderberry that actually gets imported into North America. And there's nothing wrong with those, but absolutely, we would love to see more domestic product getting sold. So part of the challenge is really trying to build that economies of scale and getting our systems built up and getting our demand for the North American elderberry, domestically grown product, and supporting these local farmers or farmers in the Midwest or Indiana that, that want to produce this stuff and try to make a profit doing it. So there is definitely an interest. There's a big interest in it. So let me, if we miss anything, we need to come back, feel free to ask questions. I'm going to give you some good resources to follow up with, as well as myself. So, there are some challenges to growing it. It is a hand harvested product. You have to plan on having people to go out and harvest at harvest time, which is usually going to be August, probably for Indiana. That it ranges, it goes into September sometimes. And it also depends on whether you're using determinate plants or indeterminate plants. Indeterminates, of course, being something that produces more than just one set of flowers. It'll keep producing, sort of like indeterminate tomatoes will. So I'm sorry. So I want to tell you about the Midwest Elderberry Growers Co-op for a minute. You saw that I had on this slide at the beginning. I do work with the Elderberry Growers Co-op. I'm actually like a volunteer, sort of like a coordinator, trying to get people hooked into that resource. And I will tell you that that's something that if you ever join it, you don't have to dedicate all of your crop to it. Right now, they're only doing Class A shares, but we can get into some details on that a little bit later. But I think it's a really good organization to work with. They have estimated that we need to have a market that is supplying 22,500 acres of North American elderberry. So we got over 20,000 acres yet to go in production, where we think we would like to see in production for what really lies ahead. So yeah, and it's a matter of building out this infrastructure. I think we want to keep things decentralized rather than this becoming another commodity product. It's not, just like these other things that we're talking about: pawpaws, persimmons, hazelnuts, chestnuts. Everybody that's doing this kind of thing right now is really working on these regional hubs or other, more creative ways to do distribution, that we can keep things local and keep more money into the local farmers. So that's really the goal of this thing. And that's one of the things that the Midwest Elderberry Growers Co-op has been all about. It started out actually as the Minnesota Elderberry Growers Co-op, but it's obviously expanded. We do have some growers here in the state, some that have been doing it for a long time that haven't been involved in some of the work that some of the other people have done, and then some that are kind of new doing it. So I'm happy to see that we're getting a little bit of a start, and we hope to see more of it. So one of the big things that you need to do when you're doing any scale really is to have a destemmer, some kind of device that's going to take those stems off. The typical process is to wash and then destem and then freeze. These do not keep very well, so they have to be frozen. There is a process that some people have developed that's really good for getting them basically almost like a flash freezing, like like the berries that you eat that you see in the grocery store that are frozen that way. Unless somebody's going to take them and do something right away, or you're going to take them and make them into dried berries. So the destemmer, this thing used to cost this. I'm going to tell you about Terry Durham here in a little bit for those that don't know who he is. But and I think I know a few people that are already on with us that probably do know who Terry is. But Terry developed this destemmer, and I think when he first made it, it was about a $10,000 product. And I think he's got that down into like the $5,000 or $7,000 range. I'm not really sure, but it's still pretty pricey. But people have come up with other things. These guys, for example, I think they actually used a modified grape destemmer to do theirs. But if you're doing small batches, you could freeze them and then knock the stems off afterwards, or you could hand pick them off, but it's not a job you want to do on a large scale. So having some kind of destemming device is going to be good. Terry's actually shakes the berries back and forth and then separates the stems from the berries. So this is just an example of a processing station that somebody had set up at one time. As I mentioned, you either can sell them fresh and get them into somebody's hands immediately, or you're going to do something, maybe you're making your own product with them so you can use the fresh berries. Another thing, of course, is the flowers. There is a growing market for the flowers. Elderflower is really great for medicinals. And that is something that some farmers that have already done berries for a while are deciding to put a certain percentage of the crop into actually harvesting the flowers first. So, but as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to say there's probably at least 200,000 pounds of imported dried elderberries. I know one of the big herb supply companies that supplies a lot of health food stores. One year it had 100,000, the next year they got about 40,000, and that was just their 2 orders one year. And you can imagine the demand that has grown for products like this that actually are immune boosting. I don't have much on that, but let me mention this real quick, and I'm going to point you to some resources where you can read up more about the health benefits of it. But it is a super powerful antioxidant. It is the second most potent, or I should say, it has the second highest antioxidant value of any other plant that's grown in North America. The aronia berry would be the first, but it's got 3 times the antioxidant value of blueberries. So it's very important from that standpoint, and it's also a very important anti-inflammatory. We're finding out more in research that it actually does provide some benefit for, like internal tissue inflammation, that sort of thing. But it's probably best known as an antiviral and immune boosting product. Native American Indians used it for many years for that kind of thing. It's really probably one of the things that it's most popular for. And that's what a lot of the medicinal products, if you go into a health food store, you're going to see this in the cold and, flu type kind of product lines. So, and as I mentioned, a lot of these berries and concentrates and things that are coming over from Europe are what's going into most of these products. It's the smaller batch, smaller value-added products that you're seeing either regionally or locally that people may or may not be using North American elderberry, but we're trying to push more people to use these domestically grown elderberries. So you can also make dyes out of it. And another thing that's really getting to be more popular is using it as a food additive for beer, for cheese, for kombucha flavoring. There's been a number of different people that have tried some things like that and that are starting to buy from the co-op for those purposes. So it's not strictly a medicinal type of thing or a jam or jelly type of thing, or wine, of course, elderberry wine. So there is a lot of potential yet for this. Think about cranberries. Nobody really knew much about cranberries as a marketed product until you heard about Ocean Spray. And Ocean Spray was a co-op very similar to the North American elderberry, or the Midwest Elderberry Growers Co-op. So it's the same sort of thing. That's how they got on the map, was doing their cooperative stuff. And then the advertisements that they put on TV were, and their products were really part of a co-op effort. So I apologize. I'm having to squint here because my screen's got switched on me and I can't see on my little laptop screen very well. But anyways, there's a number of cultivars. The names that you'll hear most popularly, the most popular ones are like the Ranch, the Bob Gordon, the Adams. There's actually one called Adams 2, which I'll show you here in a second. And there's a number of others. Some of these were developed at the Center for Agroforestry at the University of Missouri. Some of these have been just, various people have worked on different varieties. There's another one, I don't think I have anything on here, called Marge. But you want to look for the cultivars for consistency, obviously. Most plantations are usually done through cuttings, which are about this time of year. So if you were wanting to put some out, it might be getting a little bit late to be getting cuttings. There are nursery plants, though, that can be purchased. And I know I think we're going to have somebody else on the panel later on that has grown some elderberries up at their farm that she works at up at New Forest Farm. Karen, maybe you could contact her, but there's other people that do grow Most of my connections are with people that grow cuttings, but there are people that do grow plants in like little starter packs, that kind of thing. So you can put those out later in the year. We need to have more organic certification product. There is higher demand for that. All of the growers that are in the Elderberry Growers Co-op and some of the other network of growers that we work with are actually doing stuff. They're doing, I'm going to say they're doing it organically, but they're not certified organic, right? So that's kind of the direction that a lot of these growers have gone. But certified organic is nice too, because there's higher demand now for certified organic value-added products. So yeah, there's probably a lot that could be said about the production and about putting out the plants, but you know, in this half hour that we have, we really don't have too much time to get into that. So pretty much, yeah. There's a process that River Hills Harvest. I'm going to tell you about them here in a minute. I mentioned about the frozen process. So Terry Durham at River Hills Harvest does have a process that is the same process that the Midwest Elderberry Growers Co-op likes to use for getting elderberries prepared and for storage. Another thing that members in the Elderberry Growers Co-op can do is actually buy. So imagine this, you have to be a grower to be in that co-op, but a lot of these growers are also producing their own products. And sometimes they run out of product and then they can buy from the co-op for their own. So they're not just necessarily selling, but they might also be buying. And the co-op, of course, sells to anybody who's looking for product like this. So, and then typically it is packed in about a 25-pound pails. That's one of the most popular ways to pack it and deliver it. So I'm gonna, hang on. I think I'm gonna skip this slide, but it's kind of more of the same thing. There is a, well, actually this is from a geographical standpoint. I typically would tell anybody that it'll grow just about anywhere, all the way from down in the South and Texas and Florida, all the way up north to about upper peninsula of Michigan, southern Wisconsin, or I'm sorry, northern Wisconsin and northern Minnesota, and so on. I don't know if anybody's growing it up in Canada or not. That might be a little bit out of the range, but it's a pretty hardy plant, but that's about the range you're going to see. And then quite a ways out west as well. Does like, you really want well-drained soil, but when you're trying to establish your plants, you do want to make sure that you're keeping them moist. That's really important. But they'll tolerate partial shade, but you pretty much want kind of a, you know, a full open fields that's not going to have too much of that kind of a, in other words, just you need to kind of have them in full sun. And another thing I think you really want to watch out for is deer pressure, because the deer will find these and birds will find these. So if you find that you're in a situation where birds, which when they get ripe, a lot of birds will find these berries pretty quick, and netting sometimes comes into play, and you might need to do that. So here's one of the varieties. Adams 2 is really popular. It's about 9 to 10 foot tall plant. It's indeterminate. Most growers are going to cut their stuff down to the ground at the end of the year, so this one will work for that. This is just a close-up picture of the flowers of Adams. This is a ranch. Ranch is a very popular variety also, or I should say cultivar. Remember, again, it's Sambucus nigra canadensis, and then these particular cultivars. And it's not that these are the only ones that you can grow, but these are the ones that are most popular in commercial production these days. So you can see some of them don't get too tall, but you will find some that can get up to about 10 feet tall. And another very popular variety, Bob Gordon. This is Terry Durham from River Hills Harvest, and he's somebody I'm going to introduce you, give you some more information about here in a little bit. But he's one of the pioneers of this industry, really, for commercial production. He is by no means the only one, but he is probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest one. And if you get around to many of the organic farming conferences, you'll very likely see Terry at some of them, at least here in the Midwest. This gentleman's no longer with us, but he knew a lot about a lot of stuff, particularly woody plants. So as we're talking about perennial production, this gentleman here really knew a lot. Paul Otten, he was up in Minnesota, I believe, and his farm was called Natura Farms. But here he is standing next to a John's, which is anywhere from an 8 to 10 foot plant, determinate. And there's just, you can see how tall that plant gets, pretty big. So they do grow in natural areas. Obviously, they're native. So you can find wild plants. You can take cuttings even off of them. But this is kind of the general area that you're going to find them. They will grow along roadsides. That's probably one place I think a lot of people see them and they go, oh, is that an elderberry? Let's go pick some elderberries. So along streams, of course. And as I mentioned, full sun is best. But not only do we want to grow elderberries, or can we grow elderberries for food production or for medicinal value, but they can also be used for windrows, hedgerows, windbreaks and so on. In a lot of permaculture applications, you'll see some of these other kind of plants that could be used for a variety of things. And this is one of them. I think it'd be great just to see more restorative agriculture type stuff where we're using these plants, things like elderberry. So you really need to think about how it's going to fit for your farm. It's just like anything else, just like any other crop. Is it going to work for what we do? Do we have the right environment to grow it? I've had people say, oh, I really got this great field. I think I want to do it, but it's pretty wet all the time. What do you think about that? Well, that might be a bit marginal. Might not want to put it there. So really do your research and see if it's going to fit where it's just not going to grow in any condition, but it does have a pretty wide variety of conditions that it can grow in, but you don't want it to be, it may grow naturally along streams, but in a production environment, and if it's a field that's going to get wet and stay wet, there could be some issues. So back to the Elderberry Growers Co-op. The co-op has two types of shares, Class A shares and Class C shares. I'm not going to get into that much right now. Right now, I can tell you that they're only doing Class A shares, but basically you would be able to sell a certain amount of your product or however much you wanted to provide, but you would get priority also if you were set up with them and to have your berries maybe go to a buyer. There is, again, some advantages and disadvantages to the types of shares that you do. The gentleman that really could speak to that more is Chris Patton, and I'm going to give you his contact info. And if you're interested and you want to know more about the co-op, and I'm going to also give you a web page that you can go to where you can read up more on the co-op to kind of look at what the advantages or disadvantages might be to the different types of shares. But, the co-op isn't the only way to do it. I can tell you here in Indiana, there are a lot of producers that are producing their value-added products that want to buy small batches, or they're making small batch products, I should say, and they're buying their elderberries from these imported European sources, the dried elderberries, for example. I think it's better to make the products with fresh berries, with whole berries. And I do know somebody here in Indiana that has a value-added product that did just that. They converted over and now they're buying a lot of their berries from the co-op. That's a product that's made out in Richmond, Indiana, or near Richmond, Indiana. And it's a sister company at Hidden Pond Farms. It's called, sorry, the name escapes me at the moment, but Hidden Pond Farms has a variety of food products that they make. And then they also make, Abington Meadows is actually the brand that makes hawthorn berry and also makes an elderberry syrup. And now they're buying most of their, they do harvest some locally, and then they get the rest of the berries that they need. And they're growing like crazy. But I would love to see more people doing just that, actually using these berries that are being grown domestically rather than buying these imported ones. So yeah, I think the potential really exists for somebody to get creative, maybe come up with ways that they might want to distribute product more in Indiana or outside of Indiana. I don't think there's, this talk was really geared toward trying to bring more people into the, getting interested and getting some questions maybe answered, or, seeing if we could find some more people that would want to explore this a little bit and see how we all together, working together, can actually produce, produce berries for our value-added producers here in the state, people that are making syrups, that are making gummies. I don't know how many people I've picked up on in the last couple of years that have now gotten into doing this. And by no means are they selling it to hundreds of stores like somebody I'm going to show you here in a minute, but we don't want to forget about those people, and we want to find ways to produce. So if somebody's just doing small, maybe they're doing a half an acre, or maybe they've got 10 or 20 plants and they want to sell some of their stuff, there's probably somebody in the state. You don't need to be part of a co-op to do that. It might end up being something like that people like that want to buy from in the future. This is all still pretty young, whether it's something that's done through the Midwest Elderberry Growers Co-op, or something that we develop here in the state. I think we have potential for ways to get creative and actually produce and provide more of this product to people locally as well as outside the state. So we just got to keep our eye on the market and where everything is happening. So there is a lot of potential. So the Growers Co-op did do a survey a while back, but I can tell you right now there's about 31 members in the co-op, but they surveyed a whole bunch of other people and have about 160 other growers that they're aware of people that are interested in buying and selling and so on. So we've identified a lot of interest in this and a lot of people that are trying this out. So and this would be pretty much in the Midwest, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa are very popular states for it, but also Indiana, Ohio are starting to pick up on it. Illinois, of course. So I want to get into, I'm going to see how we're doing on time. We're really
Chris, we just
close.
have we have 2 minutes
Yeah.
left. Yeah.
This spotted wing drop silly there are some pests, but this is probably one of the most, that guy right there is probably the most popular pest. So let me tell you a little bit here about River Hills Harvest. I think I can do this in just a couple minutes, but Terry Durham was one of the original pioneers of producing commercial elderberry in the U.S. He is located down in Missouri. He has a product line called River Hills Harvest. I actually help sell some of that product here in central Indiana. And he is a great source of cuttings. As I mentioned, you can also get plants from places like New Forest Farm up in Wisconsin. There's a number of other good sources, but you want to seek out people that have experience with this production. And some people are getting into it that are doing berries and now are also selling cuttings. So you can find cuttings in quite a few places. But Terry is definitely one of the best, I would have to say. He's partnered with the Center for Agroforestry pretty much from the beginning, which is at the University of Missouri. And if you look at that state, that's a true agroforestry state. And I think there's a lot that we can learn. But that's his website. And if you go there, there is a growers information tab. He has this upcoming workshop. He does these kind of workshops every year. These are great. I'm not pitching this because I get anything for it. It's just a great learning resource. Terry is one of the best people to learn from. These are some of his products. I help sell some of these products here in Indiana. This is Chris Patton, who is with the Growers Co-op. And this was just a field day that they were doing with some other growers once upon a time. So here's our contact info. You can email me there, chris@provivoag.com. You could get a hold of Chris Patton at the Growers Co-op if you have more questions about that at midwest-elderberry.coop. Or go to this website. Definitely go to midwest-elderberry.coop, because there you'll find a wealth of information. You can find a lot of membership information if you're interested in learning more about how the shares are distributed and what that means. as well as a ton of information on health benefits and growing. And I will mention, if you go to Terry's website, riverhillsharvest.com, he does also have online courses that you can check out. And I would definitely encourage you, if you are going to get into this from a commercial scale, I think you would benefit a lot. And maybe making it down to one of his summer workshops would be great.
So Chris, I think we're going to have to wind this up so that we can move over to the next thing.
Yep.
I want to thank you so much for your time and for all your information. I know there was one question that somebody direct messaged me privately about how to deal with like the spotted wing Drosophila. Maybe you can answer that in the chat. What are some ways of getting rid of bugs that end up getting in the syrup and things like that? So with that, Amy, I think you're going to present the next group and they will share their slides or their video.
Thanks, Tamara. Yep. So we have a couple speakers coming up. Julia Valiant is a research scientist at Indiana University with Sustainable Food System Science Group, and also with the interdisciplinary Ostrom workshop. She is trained in public health, food policy, and farm policy, and does social science research, listening to farmers and other workers in the food system. Jim McKenna is an operational tree breeder, recently retired from the U.S. Forest Service and Purdue University's Hardwood Tree Improvement and Regeneration Center. Before that, he had worked for UC Davis as a research assistant with the Walnut Improvement Program and the University of California Cooperative Extension. His work he has worked with many Indiana organizations focusing on nuts, trees, and timber, and is currently working as a private forest and orchard consultant. And they're going to share some information with us about chestnut, hazelnuts, and pecans. So Julia, I will let you, and Jim, I'll let you both take over. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Amy, and thanks, Tamara. Hi, everybody. I'm Julia Valiant. And the main thing we're going to be doing during our last half hour is hearing from 3 growers about raising commercial pecans, hazelnuts, and chestnuts in Indiana. So we're shifting from our native tree fruits to our native tree nuts. Let's see, I brought these growers together because a year ago, our Indiana, State Department of Agriculture and the US Department of Agriculture gave our group a grant called a Specialty Crop Block Grant. And the purpose of that project is basically to take inventory of all that's happening around Indiana to support commercial food nuts and grown in Indiana. So to clarify barriers and opportunities for our state to develop more commercial food industries around these tree nuts and shrubs. Let's see, after the growers speak, I'll tell you just a little bit about what we're beginning to find across the state. But first, I want to introduce you to the growers and to Jim. So Amy just introduced you to Jim McKenna. He will speak next. And as Amy said, Jim is a big leader in all of our state organizations having to do with nuts and trees. If you go to the Indiana Nut and Fruit Growers Association, which Chris Heater talked about earlier, there's Jim. If you go to the Indiana chapter of the American Chestnut Foundation, there's Jim. Northern Nut Growers Association, Indiana Walnut Council. Jim really has been our extension lead for nuts. So Jim is going to highlight some opportunities and challenges in raising trees for food nuts. Then after Jim, we'll hear from the growers. And first we'll hear from pecan grower Lee Britton, who lives in Arcadia, Indiana. Arcadia is about 30 miles north of Monument Circle in Indianapolis. Lee works as a business planning advisor through his own company, Lonesome Duck Financial, and he vends lavender at one of the Carmel farmers markets. Second, we'll hear from Karen Vanek, who through her work with Restoration Agriculture Development out of Wisconsin, has worked with Indiana landowners to install commercial hazelnut stands in polyculture with other species. You can also hear Karen on Thursday during the Regenerative Agriculture webinar that will wrap up the Small Farms Conference. And then finishing us up today will be chestnut grower Iron Sterling, who will describe his family's U-pick chestnut orchard at Anderson Orchard in Mooresville, which is southwest of Indy. Now let's hear from Jim McKenna.
Hey, well, thank you so much, Julia. Yeah, and Tamara and Amy for putting this together. You've done really great. Thanks so much for Chris Heater. Talk about somebody who does a lot in the Indiana nut and fruit growers, right, Julia? You know Chris well at IU, and she's just been tremendous. She's also been tremendous, becoming tremendous with the northern nut growers too. Well, alrighty, yeah. So like Julia said, the real feature of this talk and session we would have done live for you too was with our growers. You know, we've got 3 outstanding growers representing these crops. And I'll just tell you that nut crops in general are proving quite profitable. Like you heard with the persimmon and pawpaw from Chris, and then it was Steve there, right, with elderberry. The same kind of returns are possible with the nut crops. What's really the key with all of them is choosing the right varieties, and then having the right soils, being in the right region, and assuming you get the right climate. Microclimates can matter a lot. Pests, all of these crops are either native or they're closely related from other species, Asian species with the hazelnuts, and the European with the hazelnuts, and the Asian with the chestnut. But those are quite compatible with our ecosystem and our climate. So you have to look out for that. And then the fourth real thing too, with all of them too, you need to think from the start, how are you going to harvest and manage these trees once they start coming into production? Because you're not going to have commercial production until 4 to 6 years, really, with hazelnuts starting first, chestnuts, and then pecans taking the longest. So all of that is really important to consider. All right, well, with that, I would like to go ahead and introduce Lee Britton. Lee's going to tell you about the real on-the-ground experience starting in pecan, and he's got a pretty nice history too. As a young man growing up with pecans. So yeah, let me turn it over to Lee.
Hey, Julia or Jim, I think you had the audio turned off. You have to turn the audio back on. We can't hear anything.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Thank
Is
you,
that-
Lee. I was just going to jump in.
Have you got it now?
I'm working on it. Let's see. If I play it again, holler at me if the audio doesn't come clear.
My name is Lee Britton, and I'm the owner of Lonesome Duck Farm. I first got interested in pecans because we have lots of pecan trees on my family's farm back in Louisiana, where I grew up. Pecans are definitely my favorite nut to eat. If you ever had the opportunity to sample local fresh pecans, you can tell a big taste difference compared to pecans you would typically eat from your grocery store. I think that pecans have a lot of appeal to the landscape. In the summertime when it's hot, they lots of deep shade. And then in the fall and winter, when the leaves drop off the trees, really the beautiful pattern of the tree branches emerges. We moved to Indiana and moved to our farm in 2015 in Hamilton County. About half of our farm is planted on 10 acres of pecans, which is about 275 trees. About 80% of our trees are either Hart or Kansas varieties. The remaining 20% includes Shepherd, Oswego, Lucas, and Pawnee varieties. Most of our pecans are about 3 to 5 years old. How is it going raising pecans? As with most trees, pecans are a long-term investment. We hope to have our first few handfuls of pecans to eat this fall, but depending on variety, you're looking at 7 to 10 years from planting until you have your first meaningful crop, and 20 to 30 years before the trees approach full production levels. What lessons have I learned? I would recommend that you plant pecan trees in spring, not fall. Fall planted trees have lots of issues such as frost heave, and you just are not out in your fields as much during the winter to see problems as they pop up. The root system for pecans is almost as important as the tree itself. As an example, we had a tree or two that was mowed down accidentally when they were cutting hay in our fields, but that rootstock was able to send out a new shoot rapidly. And next spring, I was able to graft that tree, and it just kept right on growing. Well, if I had pouring out that tree instead, it might have taken 2 or 3 years for that tree to get established and start growing again. Orchard design is very important with pecans. Most of my fields are on 40 by 40 foot spacing, which means it'll be at least 30 years until I had to thin out any trees. Sunlight hitting the pecan leaves is the key element to pecans actually making nuts. The rule of thumb is that you go out at noon in your orchard, more than half of the orchard floor should be in sunlight. If it's not, then it's time to start thinning out trees. And that's something that's very difficult for growers to do, which is why I go with the wider spacing, so it'll be a very long time until I have to carry down trees I spent so much time working on. Pollination chart is very important when you're planting out your orchard. Pecans pollinate by wind, so you want to make sure that there's overlap between varieties and there's adequate pollen shed during the pollination season. Pecans do best in well-drained soils, so loamy or sandy soils as opposed to clay soils. Every other week from April through June, we do foliar zinc sprays on our pecans, as zinc is a limiting micronutrient. How do I plan to sell pecans? I plan to sell them all in shell, at least in the first few years. Most Indiana growers are getting about $4 to $8 per pound for in-shell pecans. This compares to wholesale prices back in the South that might be $1 to $3 per pound. There's definitely higher profits you can make by selling pecans either cracked or shelled, but then you have additional expenditures regarding the shelling equipment needed. And depending on the marketplace in which you're selling them, there might be additional paperwork where they might require you to sell them in a certified kitchen, for example. I'm definitely pushing the boundaries growing pecans this far north in zone 5B. But as you can see in the chart below, in the green areas, native pecans have grown in river valleys in the Midwest. The two main factors that pecans be able to grow and produce nuts this far north are the tree cold hardiness and the number of frost-free days in the year. You want to make sure that you are planting the right varieties of pecans, because if you plant the wrong varieties there from the south, they will die from extreme cold during the first winter. As an example, my trees were able to survive the polar vortex from a few years ago to -20 degrees. And then you need about 175 frost-free days to produce a crop with the varieties of pecans I'm planting, which is about the amount of days that you get in central Indiana. While southern pecans need over 200 frost-free days to produce a crop, which is why they won't work here. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Okay, everybody. Now, as we toggle over to play you Karen's video about hazelnuts, I want to encourage you to go ahead and drop any questions you might have into the chat. There's 4 of us here, and one of us is bound to be able to get back with you. Now, here's Karen.
Hi everybody, my name is Karen Vanek. I am the nursery manager at Forest Agriculture Nursery. I'm here to talk to you today about growing hazelnuts around Indiana. And our nursery, we've been growing hazelnuts for a long time, and we've been doing mass selection breeding of hazelnuts for both population fitness and individual plant performance. And so what we have now are plants that are equipped with cold hardiness, earlier production, more disease resistance, higher yields, and all in context of the real world in less than perfect conditions. So in other words, we don't necessarily have to be perfectionists when it comes to farming for hazelnuts in this region. Hazelnuts, they come as seedlings. They also come as vegetatively propagated, and so that means they're clonal when they're in this case, and when they're seedlings, that means there's individual variation from plant to plant. There's advantages to both, and more details, this is a good place to check out Upper Midwest Hazelnut Development Initiative. Where I'd like to go now is talk about the latest Indiana planting that we did over in Summitville. And what we started with were seedlings that looked quite like this, give or take sizes like that. And so these are dormant bare root seedlings. That's what they typically look like. That means there's no soil on them. They're sleeping and they're taken out of the cold room, so they're just starting to wake up. And we were at Jason and Sarah Dickey's farm in Summitville. And out of their entirety of their farm, they asked us to transplant across 10 acres a series of hazelnuts. We also did a polyculture, so there was also apples, there was also a whole pile of chestnuts, but the main focus was the hazelnuts. Their soil was so amazing, we've never seen anything like it, so we were honestly just ready to go and get planting on their farm. Whoever was stewarding their land, they did a really good job. What we asked them to do prior to us transplanting, we just asked them to mow the field as low as they could go, just so we could have readily accessible soil, using that little red tool there on the back of that tractor. That is a machine transplanter. And so it's equipped with a blade, looks kind of like a giant pizza cutter, and so that makes a slit into the ground and an opening big enough for these trees to be put into there, and then the wheels on the back are pivoted to seal up that crease that was put into there. And that's another vantage point. Good manager there. And this is what the end result looks like. So the little seedlings are propped up, they're nice, upright, tucked in, and ready to grow. These are the tree tubes that were put around the chestnuts and maybe some of the oak trees as well. And so those delineate where the canopy tree rows are going to be. And all in between that pasture, that's where all of those hazelnuts are put in. And so this is another angle of that. And you can see the whole family was involved. Their kids, Elijah and Emma, like they were such a huge help, and it was adorable. And so overall, like I said, besides the 8,000 hazelnuts that we put across this 10-acre plot, we included chestnuts, apples, all kinds of varieties of native flowering and fruiting shrubs for the family to enjoy over the years. And in 5 years from now, this is an example of what the hazelnuts may look like at their place. It's green, it's vibrant, and this is what it might look like maybe in January when all the leaves are gone, but the catkins on the plants might still be there. This is an example of alley cropping, and so the Dickeys, they can elect in some areas on their property to be able to crop in between the rows where they have their perennial tree crops right now. And so on the side in this picture, we've got the hazelnuts, but we've seen all kinds of things. You can do hay, you can do corn, you can do soy, we've got perennial asparagus even. And even here we have marginal habitat. You can see this interesting space on the right-hand side with all those interlocking circles. So we created a hazelnut labyrinth at the farm where I work. Hazelnut processing in the region, it's only getting easier and easier as the years go by. So this is really exciting. So we're getting to a point where we can just directly harvest hazelnut clusters from the bush itself, suck them up into this green machine, and it will spit out here the nuts that don't have the husk on them. And so that means they're ready to get sent to places where they can be turned into all kinds of products. And this is an example of what they can look like too. And so we're not only doing farming of hazelnuts, like we can farm livestock. We can also utilize these animals as our integrated land managers. We're also farming carbon. We're farming little kids. We've got pigs too. So thank you so much. Looking forward to getting some questions from everybody.
Amazing. Okay, Karen, thank you so much for producing that beautiful video. I am just smiling watching it. Now I want to figure out, let's see. I want to get our third video going. Let's see. I gotta do a little tooling around in here. It's just wanting to show me Lee's video and not Iron's video. Let me close Lee's.
Maybe we have some people that would like to ask some questions. I know there was one, Karen, there for vacuum tool. I think you answered it. Does anyone else have any other questions for Karen or for Lee while we're waiting?
All right, now. Can y'all see this video?
My name is Iron Sterling and I'm with Anderson Orchard in.
Can you hear that and see that video?
Yes,
Yeah,
we
just
can.
paused.
Okay, here we go.
Mooresville, Indiana. My name is Iron Sterling and I'm with Anderson Orchard in Mooresville, Indiana. Our farm is roughly 200 acres. We primarily grow apples. We do have some peaches and plums and nectarines and pumpkins and berries. And we also grow chestnuts, which what we're going to talk about more today. It started early 90s. We had an opportunity a guy was selling chestnuts and wanted us to buy some chestnuts off of him to sell in our store. And my father-in-law said, why not? Let's try it. And they were gone quicker than he expected. So we decided to plant some chestnut trees. And that's where we are now. Is, we have a neighbor in a property down the road that grows, there's about 150 trees on his property. And we have roughly 120 trees on our property for U-pick. We harvest, roughly 700 to 1,000 pounds from the property that we lease for our store. And then our U-pick, we don't really keep track of the poundage because they just bring them out and we weigh them and charge them. We are adding 60 more trees this spring. So it's roughly 6 years, we'll start getting some chestnuts off those trees. Of course, the bigger they get, the more nuts we're going to have. Most of our trees in the U-pick orchard are almost 30 years old now, 27. They're roughly 25 to 30 years old. So we are trying to get a younger grove established so we could maybe start updating some of those areas, because we're seeing some decline in production and the trees kind of dying a little bit. So we're considering, once these trees starts growing, we'll start moving them out. The U-pick seems to be a big thing with the Asian culture. We have a big Asian following for our customers, and they seem to be the primary people who buy most of our chestnuts. It was a food they grew up on. Unlike most of us, we just heard about it in a song. So, but they do use it, and I've been told that they press it for like flour, and they get the oil. So there's a lot of advantages, I think, and health advantages for them, they say. Our prices on the chestnuts, if you want to pick your chestnuts, right now we're at $5 a pound. And the chestnuts that we pick and bring into the store, we're at $6.50 a pound. As far as I know, it's pretty good price. We seem to sell everything that we harvest and have. So I don't know if that's below market, or we don't really pay attention to any of all that. So we just think of what we think is a fair price and go with that. So that's currently where we're at. I don't see it going up, or in the next couple of years at least. I don't see it. There's a reason why we would have to. There's not a whole lot. The hardest thing about them is picking them up, really. We have tools that will pick them up, and as far as like spray program, it's not like apples. We have an extensive apple program that we spray all the time, but chestnuts don't require any of that. We do blow, like the hulls, we'll clean up all those. So you have like after the fall, we'll do a cleanup of the ground and get it clear. And then we spray them maybe once or twice. Or we will still get worms, and that's pretty much it. We will cut the dead out to keep them looking halfway decent. But as far as like the labor intensive, it's not too bad.
Okay, so everybody, this was Iron Sterling, who you were just listening to. He's one of the leads at Anderson Orchard in Mooresville, where they have this gorgeous, and hopefully you're seeing it on the screen now, chestnut orchard that's by some accounts 30 and others 40 years old. Here are some pictures that we took on a couple of visits there during the summer and during harvest season. When you're there at harvest time, on the left here, you can go to this sunny area and get your pumpkins, and you can go to another sunny area and get your apples. And then you can take shade in the chestnut grove. And if you're so inclined, you can gather chestnuts. This is their cooperator who he mentioned, who has an adjacent property and raises over 100 chestnut trees on that property. His name is Leon Clark. I believe he's 93, and this is his beautiful record-keeping binder in his right hand. And then here were two customers of the Chestnut U-Pick orchard on one of the days we went. On the left is Hwasan, who's from Korea. She lives in Bloomington, and she described roasting chestnuts, baking chestnuts, and eating them in savory and sweet dishes, and how they're a big part of a Thanksgiving type of celebration that Korea has traditionally had every year in September. And then on the right is Lin Lin, who is from China originally and now lives in Carmel. She was there with her mom, and they were gathering chestnuts to take home to their dad so that he could use them to make soup. Let's see. I am going to skip the slides that, oh, and here's your bag of chestnuts after you harvest. So that we can move into the live Q&A, I'm going to skip the slides I brought about our study and just encourage you to please contact me if you're interested in our research and what we're finding out across the state as we listen to more and more growers and nut buyers. So now, how about all the Karen and Lee, if you're still here, and Jim, go ahead and turn on your videos and I'll stop sharing. And we can do some live Q&A until it's time for Amy and Tamara to wrap up.
And we don't have a lot of time, so I am going to go ahead and put up the link to our evaluation while you're answering questions. There were some hazelnut questions. Sorry, I'm looking.
Yeah, there was a pop-in conversation about hazelnuts there.
Yeah, where to purchase chestnut trees was one of the questions. And I don't know if you guys have advice on that.
I just put in the chat, Route 66 Chestnut Cooperative. They're in Ohio, and that's Greg Miller, who he's had the longstanding Empire Chestnut. That's probably the best clearinghouse to go to, because he'll recommend local sources to you if he doesn't have what's right for you, or if they're sold out. The trees are a little bit in short supply too, so it pays to try to order chestnut trees, all of these nut trees, honestly, a year in advance.
I second that,
Um,
but we're sold out, so I can agree with that sentiment.
There was a question, which I know was also probably answered in the chat, but just so we capture it here, is it possible or how difficult it is to husk by hand? If you were aiming to grow chestnuts they said for your own consumption, but just in general, maybe to talk about that. Anyone want to respond to that?
Answer for chestnuts. I recall in the chat box area, there's some things to consider when you want to harvest and dehusk hazelnut. I just saw that you mentioned chestnut. And so hazelnuts as a bush, they tend to adhere, like the husks and the nut and the shell, they tend to stick together. And so that's a main thing to consider if you do want to cultivate and supply hazelnuts. And so what we usually like to do is try to dry them off a little bit. And so the husk is more flaky, and it's relatively easy to remove the husk that way, but it's more of a scalable thing. And so not everybody has the time or energy or desire to take even a 5-gallon bucket's worth and just do it by hand. So there's a lot of backyard kind of equipment available to do that. However, there are industrial scale machinery. And so that green machine I showed you, which was a combine, which sucks up the hazelnuts while they're in a husk and just kind of tumbles them around and processes them and separates that chaff from the actual nut itself. It's a really innovative, it's a cool tool.
Thanks, Karen. So we're at the end of the official time. If you were not able to scan the QR code there, Tamara did put the link to the evaluation in the chat. And if you'd like to see more programs like this on perennial crops, we need that kind of feedback as we develop future programs. So please do include that. And if you get another opportunity, you might get one later about commenting on future content for the Small Farms Conference. Your help is appreciated. I'd like to thank all our speakers today. Appreciate you all being here. We're going to stop the recording, but if you want to hang on for a little bit and ask questions, as long as our speakers are okay with that, I don't mind hanging out a little bit. But with that, thanks again, and save the date for our 2023 Indiana Small Farms Conference. Thank you all.